Good morning and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH FM, your home for community radio. I'm your guest host, Tom Breen, filling in for Paul Bass as he wraps up his celebration of Passover. And we're inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic. Patrick Dunn, Juan Carlos Soto, and Max Cisneros all make New Haven tick through their work at the New Haven Pride Center. We're going to be talking throughout today's episode about the work that they continue to do, even as many of us remain trapped at home or having to go to work to find some way to feed ourselves and make sure that our families stay safe and whole during this crisis. So Patrick Dunn is the executive director of the Pride Center. Juan Carlos Soto is the Director of Case Management and Support Services, and Max Cisneros is the Latinx Program Officer. Patrick, Juan Carlos, and Max, thank you all so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And hello, Max. Thank you
Hey
for
there.
joining us.
Sorry about being late. I was trying to work out all the kinks.
So I'm afraid I want to kick off by asking a question about one of the more noxious things that I saw when opening the New York Times this morning. And I'm going to throw it your way, Patrick. And before we dive into all the work the Pride Center is doing, I'd just love to hear your take on why this issue is important, why it's something that people should be paying attention to. And that was an article about Franklin Graham's Samaritan Purse running this field hospital in Central Park, where he's requiring volunteers sign a pledge before they help COVID-19 sick patients, sign a pledge saying that they are Christian and that they oppose same-sex marriage. I'm not sure how many people have been following this, but St. John the Divine in New York City already severed a potential field hospital relationship with Samaritan's Purse because of how noxious they found their homophobic stance. I wonder if this is something that, amidst all of the craziness, all of the crisis of this moment, have you been following what's happening with Samaritan's Purse and that type of kind of evangelical Christian motivated philanthropy in New York City? And is this something that New Haveners, that people should be following, should be caring about?
So I have read some about this. It's really, honestly, it's just disturbing to me. I don't know if there's really any other word that I would use. Like, I don't understand how anybody of really any faith, but even like, it's not even about faith at this point. Like, I don't understand how you can rely so heavily on your bigotry at this time. Like, you know, and the fact that there isn't more public outrage around the issue. I don't know, it frustrates me a lot, because to see, you know, people genuinely trying to give back, and I know that there's probably volunteers going there not knowing or understanding what they're getting themselves into, who just want to do good. And like, it's just so unfortunate that in a time where we're all in this together. And you know, I'm gonna quote Lady Gaga and say for a second that, yeah, you know, we're all in this together in different degrees, right? Like, somebody like Lady Gaga is experiencing this very differently than someone like me, who's experiencing very differently than someone who might be experiencing housing insecurity. But we're, at the end of the day, like, the only way that we're going to be able to beat this as a country, as a community, is if we all work together towards, you know, flattening the curve and taking care of the sick, and universally trying to elevate everyone. And to just like blatantly be trying to tear people down, it takes me back to those moments where I get really concerned about things like religious freedom laws. Because what happens if I'm literally dying and that is the only place I can go, and then I'm denied services because I'm a gay man? It's so terrifying to me that that's even a possibility. And you know, this is happening in a central part of the city. It's not like it's happening in some corner where there is, you know, 6 other medical facilities people can go to. And so it's sad. I think, unfortunately, it's not going to be the first one, and it's a case of something, this kind of bigotry, and it's unfortunately going to be directed and is continually directed at many different groups, not just queer people. probably, I would say more than queer people, our biggest group of minority folks that are going to be experiencing this kind of discrimination is actually going to be immigrants, and folks of color even more so. But to be so blatant about it and not even care that they're being so blatant about it is just, it's disturbing to me.
Juan Carlos, I want to dive deep on all of the services that the Pride Center is providing at this moment, but I also want to get at what you all see as the kind of unique vulnerabilities or at least potentials for discrimination against LGBTQ plus people during this crisis, if you see that at all. Is this something that you, as Director of Case Management and Support Services, that you are concerned about, that you're seeing on the ground, either an actual or a potential discrimination against certain populations as they seek out healthcare, housing, unemployment, anything like that?
Yeah.
And how concerned are you about this?
Well, we are lucky enough to live in a state that is fairly welcoming and accepting and affirming of the LGBTQ community. Having said that, there are instances where things like this tend to bring out the best in people and sometimes also the worst in people. So I am concerned. I am concerned seeing sort of like what we were just talking about will sort of in a way ignite that sort of hate that people may have like hidden away, may bring it to the forefront. So I am concerned and that it sort of will get worse in the state, because we do have homophobia in Connecticut. So having said that, we're affirming, we're open and to the LGBT community. There has been cases of homophobia, and it's a reality. We live in a world that often is homophobic and transphobic, and we just saw it recently in our state with certain political parties cheering on a severe case of transphobia happening in our state. So there is a fear that can happen. I have not seen it yet. What I have seen is a little bit of fear from folks going out to access service because they either don't feel comfortable going to some of those places or feel like they may encounter some specifically transphobia. But we haven't seen any cases where agencies have really where it has been a problem. But I mean, like I said, it is something that is in the back of our heads. And as we see stories like the one we were talking about, it is something that is constantly in the back of our heads. I think as a member of the LGBTQ community, it's something that is constantly in the back of your head. Anytime you interact with an agency, anytime you go to get a service, anytime you go anywhere, it's really sort of really prominent. Am I going to end up being on the receiving end of an attack?
Well, I think anyone who has been following the New Haven Pride Center for the past few years has seen that institution under your leadership, Patrick, has really become a local bulwark for programming, for services, for support for everyone really in Connecticut, particularly the New Haven region, of all stripes and casts and characters. So I wonder if, Patrick, you could, for people who do not know what the New Haven Pride Center is, maybe explain to our listeners and viewers, what was the pre-pandemic Pride Center, and how are you transitioning to this new normal?
Sure. So the Pride Center, when I talk about the Pride Center and the work that we do, I categorize it in 5 areas. So we offer case management and support services. That includes everything from all of the various exercises and work that Juan Carlos does, through offering one-on-one support and case management, to all of our support groups that meet either because the center has fostered them or they've self-fostered within the community and use the center as a location to meet. And these are, some are private, some are public, some are 12-step programs, it's a little bit of everything. So we do all that, and case management includes housing and food insecurity, addiction services, support with unemployment, general referrals for, excuse me, healthcare and other mental health needs. So it's really broad. And we're so fortunate to have Juan Carlos at the head of that. Then we have our social programming, which is really broad. It includes a lot of different opportunities to bring people together in social environments for social interactions. Some of those spaces end up also being support spaces because folks sometimes need support in social spaces, and social spaces are more comfortable to seek that support. We have our arts, culture, and humanities programming, which is encompasses all of the things that you could imagine. We do visual arts, performance arts. We have humanities works, film screenings, author talks. Pride New Haven is part of that umbrella of arts, culture, and humanities, which is a 7-day LGBTQ plus cultural festival that we produce. Then we have our LGBTQ youth focused programming. So our youth programming, which is headed up by Allah, who's also one of the founders of Black Lives Matter New Haven. It's specifically focused on kind of taking everything from the first 3 types of programs, but doing them all geared towards youth. And then our final arm is our advocacy work. And that includes things at both city, state, and federal level, depending on what the issue is or what we're talking about. And then kind of all of those programs have components that our 3 program officers work on. Max, which is one of them, our Latinx program officer. We have Miranda, who runs our women's programming. And then we were in the process of hiring someone to focus on trans work. And we're going to be starting interviews for that in March, but unfortunately, because of COVID, we've had to put that position on hold. As far as kind of post-COVID, we really kind of went back to our core and are maintaining all of those buckets of programming, but looking them through a very different lens, and looking them through kind of what we're calling our commitment to. So our commitment to support services and case management. How do we take what we were already doing, and maybe in cases things that we weren't doing, and do them virtually. Our commitment to creating authentic and inclusive programming. So Max and Miranda and Allah have been working kind of overdrive, trying to think of either how do we take things we're already planning to do and convert them virtually, or how do we create all new things and all new spaces virtually that we couldn't necessarily create before now. And then our commitment to what the future looks like. You know, the reality is that when we can all go back outside again, whether it's May 20th or 21st now, or it's August 1st, hopefully not, or whenever, where does the center need to be from a programming standpoint to be ready for that moment? So, what and how does that kind of affect Juan Carlos more than probably anybody, but how does that affect all of us and how we do our work? Does that mean that kind of all of the staff, for 4 weeks become case managers basically, and help people fill out unemployment, help people fill out SNAP benefits, help people find housing? Is that what our organization needs to do to be centering the community?
Max, could you give me and our listeners a specific example of a program that you have found yourself working on during this pandemic, and how you've navigated the realities of, this social, or maybe more aptly physical distancing, where people are advised to stay at home, some places required to stay at home unless they have to go out for emergencies. And when they are out, they have to, do incredibly asocial behavior, wear masks, keep 6 feet apart. Tell me a bit about some of the programs that you've worked on during this crisis.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you asked Pat earlier about what was the Pride Center pre, Corona and after Corona, because the Latinx program office has also kind of like taken on a bit of a change, an evolution into this new thinking. And one of the programs that sprung up is Apoyo Latinx, which is Latinx support. And the idea behind it was basically to create a space, a virtual space, a safe space where folks can come into it and kind of just like basically process what they're going through and organize ways to be able to support each other in that process. I made it very loose, but it came out of Chill and Charladas, which is another program which existed before this all broke out. So to answer your question, one of the fascinating things that I've noticed is just creating a space, because they may not have that space at home, just creating a space where folks can feel included and authentic is huge. I'm noticing that alone allows them to, we don't empower them, I don't empower them, allows them to actually see how they're empowering themselves and the communities they're working within. A lot of these youth are, for the most part, not scapegoated, frankly, and not taken serious in their family systems. So here, I'm suddenly noticing that they're the ones who are helping their family members, their neighbors, filling out unemployment forms online. They're the ones who are helping folks understand how Zoom works. And I thought I knew when I had trouble getting into this. So it just goes to show you that that kind of help is invaluable, and they feel valued. They feel valued, and they have a space to process that. And that's where Apoyo Latinx really came out of. And I look forward to the ways that um, things that I hadn't been thinking about before suddenly spring up now, and to be able to kind of like celebrate that and expand on it. I hope that answers your question.
It does, yeah, and just to get at even more of the just like the logistical details of it. When you talk about creating a space, does this space now exist over Zoom? Is it I don't know, a phone call that you have on a regular basis? How do people kind of actually access it? And then what have you been hearing young people talking about? You mentioned, young people helping families fill out unemployment forms, or mentioned helping them find kind of free food distribution sites. But how kind of logistically do you get there? And then what have you heard young people say so far?
Well, what I'm noticing is that uh, being in close proximity with your family, with close network at home, it provides an opportunity to kind of connect with folks that you wouldn't otherwise do. A lot of the time, the very thing that this generation, I keep mentioning the youth because they're most of the ones I'm kind of like for the most part working with here. And what I'm noticing is that the thing that they were most ridiculed for, staring at their phone the entire time, being disconnected, is the thing that they're most in need of. And so I'm noticing that being a reoccurring theme. Again, they find value there. But as far as the logistics of being able to get together and stuff like that, one thing that I've noticed is that one of the biggest worries I had early on is that the Pride Center didn't have much of a presence in Fairhaven. And it wasn't for lack of trying. And I was trying to figure out ways to be able to get into Fairhaven and understand the community, work with the community, not reinvent the wheel, basically build on the things that other people have already worked on. And then this happened. So no longer, it was removed the need to be in Fairhaven, because you just can't do that now, but I can still connect with the folks in Fairhaven and create spaces where I can connect with them and they can connect with each other, and we can understand a little bit more about what they're doing out there. So this, in a way, has cleared up one area and provided a way for another avenue of connection, and to let that flourish and see what happens from that. So so I've noticed different things happen: benefits, certain boons, setbacks. Of course, as an organizer, I can tell you, there's nothing like the face to face. The face to face, there's so much you can do with that. And to not have that, it does feel handicapped a bit. You do feel like something's missing. But I can tell you that the Pride Center, the Latinx office, I can tell you that they're trying to find ways to fill that gap, to fill that hole. And I feel like we're being, as long as you're open and creative about what you're trying to do, amazing things will fall into place. So logistically, I was able to kind of like get past that hump, but I know there's many other humps that'll be coming down further down the road that will require a lot of attention and creativity.
Juan Carlos, I wonder if you could tell us just a bit about what an average day is like for you these days. And average may not be the right word, but whether it be yesterday or earlier this week, how is it that you find yourself spending your time at work as the director of case management and support services, and how have you had to adapt your work to this situation?
Yeah, so the beginning of my day, probably like an hour or two, it's about trying to find resources online that folks can have access to at home. And those can be things like virtual tours, classes that they can take to kind of occupy and help people occupy that time. sort of scouring the resources and things of like, have the unemployment stuff change? Are there new executive orders that we need to inform folks about and we need to digest a little bit? With the stimulus stuff, a lot of what I was doing was trying to figure out the timeline on that and different things like that. At around 12, usually a little bit earlier, I like to turn it on a little bit earlier. We have the case management and warm line that I turn on. And then it's just receiving calls. We get about 3 to 4 calls a day, plus people texting in, because we added in a texting option. So some people don't feel comfortable speaking on the phone, especially younger folks, but they're really good at texting. So I texted with them back and forth. And the texting line tends to be a little bit of a warm line. So folks just wanting to talk to someone, folks who don't feel either safe at home or don't feel like they can live their full authentic lives right now because of their parents not being fully accepting or whatever. So it's chatting back and forth with them, sort of lending the support, some advice, and then the rest of the stuff is just helping folks, sort of walking folks through unemployment applications online, or updating them on the new executive orders. Like yesterday, I was talking to someone about some of the new executive orders around rent paying and sort of breaking it down for them and giving them the resources that they needed. And a lot of trying to communicate with, specifically now more than ever, therapists and mental health providers, sending out a survey that we were asking folks to fill out, because we want to also, vet a little bit the people that we're setting out. We want to make sure that when we're sending out a participant of the Pride Center to someone who tagged themselves as being an expert in LGBTQ issues, that they're in fact going to be an expert to that person. We don't want to add to the trauma that folks are suffering. So we do a lot of that. So a lot of just about 100 things all at once that I'm trying to juggle. And then sometimes, things come up. Like when we first started, we started with just virtual case management. So just people calling in for virtual case management. And I was starting to realize that a lot of the folks who were calling, it seemed like they just wanted to talk. Like their questions to start the conversation were very like, what's the website again for the COVID-19 thing? And then they would start talking about other things. So then that's when we decided to also add the component of the warm line, which is just people just wanted to hear another voice on the other side who they can tell their stories to and tell them, talk about how they like to wear a dress or don't like to wear a dress, and things like that get to affirm who they really are in ways that they may not be getting it in other ways in their own life right now because of everything that's happening.
You're listening to Dateline New Haven on WNHH FM, your home for community radio. I'm your guest host, Tom Breen, and I'm talking with Patrick Dunn, Juan Carlos Soto, and Max Cisneros of the New Haven Pride Center in a new kind of series that we at The Independent are doing on organizing during the pandemic, how groups that have, before this crisis, been at the forefront of advocating for various parts of the New Haven community, how they've had to adapt their work to make sure that certain populations are not overlooked during this crisis, and also to advocate for perhaps hopefully a more just and equitable future after this crisis is over. Patrick, you sent over I think a 4 or 5 page single-spaced document of all of the different services that the Pride Center has been providing during the pandemic, everything from case management hotlines to an LGBTQ needs assessment survey to drag queen story hour. I wonder if you could pick out 1 or 2 that you think of as some of the more creative responses that the Pride Center has had to come up with in order to provide former and new services to your population, and how I don't know what kind of foundation you see the Pride Center laying for that more equitable future, not just returning to a status quo, but hopefully getting to a place that doesn't look like the pre-pandemic world.
Sure. So if I pick out 2 or 3 things, so one thing I think that which is what we did within days was to prioritize folks and populations that we knew needed money immediately. So we commissioned 15, now up to 15 LGBTQ plus visual artists to create a coloring book that's LGBTQ themes, and that it's available digitally online for completely for free on our website. And we've now hired, I think is it Juan Carlos, is it 12 drag artists to pre-record drag artist story hour videos where they read LGBTQ inclusive books. And we did this in partnership with People Get Ready. Between those two and then some speakers that we have paid for some panels that we've done, we've reinvested over $2,500 of the center's budget into the artist community, the queer artist community of Connecticut, most of who will not be able to take advantage of things like the Arts Council Fund for one reason or another, because they get a lot of cash gigs, or whatever, and promoting also our art exhibit that was open at the time with a virtual tour, which resulted in us actually selling 3 paintings, which means that we'll be able to give that artist over $1,000, and kind of money that they thought were lost because their exhibit had opened, several days before the pandemic really kind of took hold. So that was one thing I thought that we were really smart about doing immediately. And I do want to give a shout out to Lucy and the Nasty Women, because really they were the first Connecticut org that I'm aware of that did a virtual tour. And when we saw it, we were like, oh my God, this is brilliant. We have to do this too, to really get our exhibit out there as well. So that's one, I think, kind of investing in Connecticut's queer artist community. So that's one I would say that we did really well. The other thing I think that, which has become a really big priority for us is we send once a week a e-blast to our whole list. And it's pretty personal. There's always a letter that comes from the full staff and talks about what's going on, what's going on at the center, what programs and services people can access. There's a section that's all the new resources Juan Carlos has found for the week. There's several shout outs for things going on in the community, either social or non-social things. And we do that every single week consistently. And that stream of communication has our open rate for our emails is almost double what it normally is. And we get anywhere between 10 and 20 emails back from people thanking us for, and because it's done in this very personal way, and it's like the subject line is usually, we're just checking in on you. And Juan Carlos creates this really cute graphic of baby animals. People write back and they say things like, thank you so much, I'm doing great, or, I've had a really rough day, but your email made it better, or I hope the staff is doing well. And it's reassuring that people need that communication right now. I think us doing that kind of consistent weekly check-in with people, even though it's done in, through a mass email format, has become something that people really rely on as a touch, a simple, opportunity to connect with something that is normal. And so I think those are 2 things I would pull out of that kind of bigger report of things that we've done. We've really tried to prioritize community and live by our motto, which kind of created itself that very first week, which was creating community when we can't share space. And everything that we've been doing over the last 4 weeks has come out of that idea of like, how do we create community? How do we create space for people? How do we offer people support and give people ways that they can, not feel alone and not feel isolated? Because the reality is that a lot of queer people are living at home alone. I think every member of our staff does. And things like our weekly check-ins have become very important, or daily check-ins rather. But a lot of people are alone, and a lot of people might be in spaces that they can't be their authentic selves. They have to go back in the closet. They have to not represent themselves for who they are, whether it's their gender identity, their expression, whatever. And so having kind of that one taste of normalcy for 5 minutes a week can be a real lifeline for folks.
Max, as you work through the various programs that you're involved with, how do you think about and how do you balance that desire to achieve what Patrick described as that fleeting sense of normalcy that I think everyone is desperate to have some sense of right now when the world seems pretty upside down? How do you balance that need for normalcy and also a need for maybe creating a future that is different than the one that existed before the pandemic? Is that something that you're thinking about as you're crafting programs? And is that something you're hearing as you talk to youth through the various programs that you run, that this is an opportunity for some pretty significant structural change?
Yeah, it's an opportunity to adapt, and that's the way I'm noticing folk talk about it. That this is times are changing, and so we're going to have to adapt to that. And to piggyback on what Patrick was saying, which is it's really significant, is just knowing you're there, just knowing that somebody is there, that somebody is listening, seeing as you scroll through the posts and seeing that there's still events coming out of the Pride Center, seeing that is significant, I think, for a lot of people. It restores a sense of normalcy. It restores a sense of somebody is there, somebody is actually wanting to hear what I have to say, because I think being able to provide value for people is really important right now. And so so what I'm noticing is that in the conversations that I've had, being able to just kind of like provide a space where people can speak about why they feel the way they feel is in itself significant, and it adds a bit of normalcy to some people's lives, actually, because I think a lot of the time people are processing with other folks but not processing their own stuff. So having a space where you can process your own stuff, it makes a big difference. At least I'm noticing that happen. And as far as the future, you know, I feel like right now people are trying to, at least for me, let me use I statements right now. I kind of like taking it day by day. I kind of just trying to like get through one day and into the next day, into the next day. Feels as though the future provides it just kind of like adds to more anxiety than maybe necessary right now. And I'm noticing a lot of folk push back on wanting to get answers about, you know, what is, are we going to get out on after, you know, May 20th? Are we going to, what does that look like? And so much is unknown right now that I'm noticing the very same kids who bring it up. Another one of them might bring up, well, we don't know that right now, but what can we do today? And they really impressed me with the amount of stuff that they're able to kind of come up on their own. Like I'm saying, provide a space and people will amaze you. And so that's basically the way I've been taking it too. Be adaptable. Whatever comes, be adaptable to that, and find ways to move forward in that atmosphere, in that environment.
I'm not sure whether this question's best for Patrick or Juan Carlos, but I know that political advocacy has been an important part of the Pride Center for a long time, and I wonder how, you know, I think a lot of Americans are realizing how politics touches every aspect of day-to-day life right now. Who has access to healthcare, who is able to vote, where you get your food, whether you have paid sick time. All of these are intensely political decisions that I think,
whether or not you can donate blood,
how you can donate blood, right? As we see, you know, in this incredibly scattershot kind of federal system that we have in this country, every state looks completely different in how it's responding to this crisis. And I wonder if you two, kind of what your take on kind of the politics of this moment, but also the role that the Pride Center plays in helping shape or influence the politics of this moment. What kind of advocacy do you see as most important that you all can be most effective at focusing on?
JC, do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
You can go first.
So, I mean, I think advocacy needs to not stop ever. You know, we have to, especially as an organization that, you know, Connecticut isn't necessarily rich with like 1 million LGBTQ nonprofit organizations advocating for constant change. And, you know, I think, you know, we have organizations on our state, and generally we all work together on a lot of different efforts. I think the bottom line is that advocacy has to keep going. And I do want to give a shout out to Rep. Jeff Curry from Hartford, who takes texts from me, I think almost every day, of me saying like, hey, what are you guys doing about this? Or hey, what are you doing about this? And also Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro and Lieutenant Governor Susan Bisowitz, whose offices both reach out pretty regularly to me about various different initiatives. Recently, the Pride Center wrote a kind of comment of support to the Lieutenant Governor, who co-signed a letter with all the other Democratic lieutenant governors across the country asking the FDA to completely remove the ban on donations by LGBTQ men, blood donations of LGBTQ men, and plasma donations, which are also extremely important right now. So I think, the advocacy work is continuing. It's, in a very different place right now. And there are activists all over the state working really hard in various different initiatives. The bottom line is that things like housing insecurity, food insecurity, all of the various things that are going to affect the broad community, I mean, all citizens of Connecticut or all citizens of New Haven, are going to affect queer people and in some ways affect us disproportionately, especially when you start taking into account things like race and gender minorities, gender diverse individuals. All of a sudden something that might affect our community at 10% higher than a non-queer person. If you're a Latinx queer person, maybe it's affecting them 20% more, and so on and so forth. And so I think advocacy just never ends, right? And I do want to give a shout out to Jeff Curry just because I literally text him every day. I mean, I'm like, what do I do if my landlord wants to show my apartment right now? What do I do if what are my rights about this? And what do you guys do? And a lot of my texts start with, what are you guys doing about blah, 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 blah. And he's just one of many, reps that I think are taking advocacy work right now very seriously. I think that there's a lot of work that still has to happen in the response to COVID in Connecticut. And there's a lot of things that we're going to need to advocate that are LGBTQ specific. Like protecting LGBTQ-owned small businesses. I'm extremely concerned about what happens to these businesses the longer and longer the shutdown has to happen for public health. I'm very concerned that we just did we kind of co-sponsored and led a large statewide needs assessment for the queer community that we're almost done collecting data on. And almost 50% of folks say they're going to be food insecure after April 30th. That's terrifying to me. And that's across the state in all kinds of different counties. And, the reality is if you live in New Haven County, you have more access to food resources. You live in Windham, you don't. There's massive mutual aid funds and work happening thanks to on-the-ground activists all over New Haven, Waterbury, Bridgeport, but what's happening in Plainville, Connecticut, what's happening in New London, Connecticut, that these kind of parts of the Connecticut that are a little bit more disconnected, just because they're further away from the center of the state. Those are the things that I think that queer people are going to need to do a lot of advocacy around to make sure that folks aren't getting forgotten and left behind.
And I don't know if you want to weigh in, Juan Carlos, as well about what you see as the kind of political role of the Pride Center, if any, right now, and kind of where your attention has been on the kind of advocacy front.
Yeah, I think by the nature of the population that we serve, we have to be an advocacy and involved in politics, right? Like whether we want to or not, our identity is often politicized, right? It's an unfortunate nature that politicians often take, right? And I think, like Patrick was saying, we have to be even more at the upfront of in the front view of advocacy, because a lot of these issues were already impacting our community. Adding to that all of the chaos that's happening now we are, you know, like Patrick was saying, if housing issue is affecting maybe 10% of the population, now it's affecting 50% of the LGBTQ population that maybe it wasn't before. And adding to that some of the other intersectionalities that often live in the LGBTQ community, now you're adding more and more layers of it. So I think, I mean, my vision when I joined the Pride Center, and you know, it's something I talked to Patrick about, was that I wanted the way we looked at like case management and supportive services to be more than just a band-aid that we're putting on a problem. Like I really wanted to go beyond just let's fill out this form so you get food stamps. Well, let's look at the issue. Why do you have to go on food stamps? Why do you have to go on this program? Let's now help you find a way that we can all together advocate for a better world, for a better place, for a better system, that you don't have to go through this ever again. It's for me really is about making sure that our community is thriving and not just surviving. We've survived for a long time. The LGBT community has just survived for a long time, fighting and all that, right? And I'm not saying that previous folks were not looking to thrive, but I think like we want to add to that spirit, right? We wanted to add to the spirit of no longer just looking to survive, that we want to continue to build on the shoulders of the giants that came before us, who advocated for us to thrive. And that's really what we want to do, and that's how we look at the work that we do at the Pride Center. So it's what we're trying to do now, right? With programs like Miranda, our women officer, was doing, where it was doing queer women and politics, right? Like we're highlighting some of those advocates, and hopefully inspiring the folks who are spending the time sharing that virtual space with us. Hopefully we're encouraging them and maybe inspiring them to get involved in advocacy, while also giving them some good time to spend virtually and sort of disconnect from all the craziness.
Yeah, and I just want to say too that, like, you know, we're just like one small piece in the world of advocacy in Connecticut. You know, there are people all over Connecticut that are doing amazing work every day in ways that we're not even like we can't even touch the level of advocacy work that they're doing. A lot of these folks do it as community organizing and do it for free and do it because they care. And you know, I want to acknowledge that, you know, what the advocacy that we're doing is one piece of a much bigger picture. And you know, without people like Ivy and Kamora and Carrie Ellington and Jesus and Ahmed and Waterbury, and you know, there's these people that are working all, and they have taken the work they were doing pre-March 13th and now continuing to do that while also doing mutual aid work and also doing you know, advocacy for people behind bars and you know, and advocacy for immigrant communities. And so I just want to shout out to those people, because you know, we as a nonprofit sometimes have to sit stuck within kind of lines and or get elevated as if we're doing all the work. And I want to make sure that we're giving a shout out to those folks, because they do it every single day on the ground in a way that I personally don't think I'm able to do.
That's where I'd love to go next. And as we have maybe 6 or 7 minutes left, I want to ask each of you about opportunities for partnerships with other organizations right now. I mean, I think that all of the mutual aid societies, whether it be the Samia Collective working with Haven's Harvest and Common Ground, and Luis Luna and Ariana Shapiro with their food garage, CT Core Organized Now. I mean, there's so many groups that are, you know, the Dale Fund, kind of forging partnerships across, maybe this is what kind of intersectionality is, kind of across different parts of our lives, parts of different community, to make sure that the, you know, hungry get fed, that the, you know, lonely are not left kind of by themselves, to make sure that, you know, people are working together to the maximum capacity to, you know, make sure that people do not unduly suffer during this. And I wonder if maybe each of you could speak for a minute as we wrap up our show about you know, I've always so admired the Pride Center's intense collaboration with other local organizations, whether it be 168 York or Long Wharf, or you really are, you never silo yourselves. You're always working with others. And I wonder if each of you could take a minute and talk about opportunities for partnership that you think could amplify some of the work that you've spoken about today. And again, as this is always what I'm subtly pushing forward. How in this, how do we get to a kind of even more collaborative future where people from all different walks of life are, helping look after one another to make sure no one is kind of completely pushed to the margins. So I don't know, maybe Patrick, if you want to take that first, and we can kind of go around.
Sure. So my philosophy since I came to the center has always been that we can't do anything alone. And some of that was because when I came to the center, we had like $3 to rub together to run for 6 months. But also the reality is that every queer person has some level of intersectionality, because their queer identity is not the only part of who they are. It may be an extremely important part, or maybe it's not, because there are plenty of queer folks who being queer is the least important part of their identity to them, and maybe their Blackness or their womanhood or their backgrounds, where they come from. There's so many pieces that make up a person, and so when you think about queer programming, you have to always be thinking intersectionally. And the other really key part of my philosophy has always been that queer identity is far too diverse and far too intersectional for one person to ever be able to represent it. So how can one organization represent queer identity in a way when we create programming? It's impossible. It doesn't matter if we had 50 people on the team and every single person was completely different. We still would not have enough folks to really truly represent every aspect of being queer. And so every time we create programs, every time we go to put ourselves out there programmatically or in service of the community, we're always keeping that thought process in mind. When I built the team at the center, one of my major goals was I want to hire people who are not like me, because I want to continually add to this incredible diversity of the center by bringing new voices and different voices to the table constantly. And it's the same when we look at programming, is how do we, if we're doing a programming on, I don't know, if we're doing a program on queer Black feminism this Sunday. So like, if we're doing that, like, how do we have that conversation alone? We can't. Yes, Allah is on our staff, and Allah can obviously speak to queer Black feminism from our own perspective. But why aren't we bringing Kimura's Cultural Corner from Hartford? Why aren't we bringing, the Carrie Ellingtons who are doing on the ground work? Why isn't Black Matters that, like, we couldn't possibly do this in a silo? It would be ridiculous. And that's just kind of how I've always approached all of our programs, that we have to have multiple people at the table to make sure that we're looking at it through an intersectional lens.
And I don't know, maybe go to Max and then over to Juan Carlos. Matt, is there anything, Max, you can say about, in particular, the program work that you do, about opportunities for partnership that may not have existed or that may not have been at the forefront of your mind before this pandemic made landfall in New Haven?
Well, I'm noticing that there are a lot of folks who, like I said earlier, are finding ways that they have been able to empower themselves and connect with other folks who are connecting needs with resources. But one of the setbacks is due to the pandemic, is that there was a partnership that I was trying to connect with the Pride Center and the Fairhaven Community Health Clinic, and it was moving along. We were recruiting folks, and then this hit us, and so we weren't able to see that partnership through. But in that process, I noticed that there were other folks who were beginning to find resources for folks that needed it. And so I noticed that what I can do is expand their reach. I can partner with them by expanding their reach. And they can in turn do the same for us for any services that we're providing for specific folks. So I'm noticing that being able to be available for folks who are already doing the work, expanding their reach, and also provide ways so they can do the same for us, has been really helpful. And I'm curious to see where we take that. One extra point that I just wanted to add that was talked about earlier was about the political piece. I'm noticing that folks aren't really talking about politics too much, um, even though there are a lot of people there are. But what I mean to say is that people are taking it upon themselves to get their needs met, and that's a really fascinating thing to see. And so I've been part of a lot of different groups and communities and nonprofit organizations. The Pride Center really is doing a unique thing here for me, in my view, in not just reaching out and putting out as much content as they are, but really in being able to like provide what's needed out there. And so I really want to commend Patrick, Juan Carlos, for seeing something that I didn't quite even, fully see. And so, for them to be, doing this interview and for me to be with them it's an honor for me. So thank you for the opportunity.
Really quickly, I want to take the ball that of praise I just got from Max and redirect it to the staff, because honestly, Juan Carlos, Laura, Maya, Miranda, Allah, and Max are doing 99% of the programming work, because I'm having to deal with all of the other organizational issues to make sure that like we're still open and we're still functioning. And so I just want to I want to say that I want to give that ball to the staff, and I don't want any praise.
Fair enough.
And Juan Carlos, in our last minute, I wonder if you could bring us home and anything you'd care to add to this conversation, and then also maybe most importantly, if people are interested in learning more about the Pride Center, wanting to access some of the services you provide, where do they go? What do they do? How do they find it? So the floor is yours for 45 seconds.
Got it. This is all like, I am lucky enough to come from the organizing world, so I have a lot of friends that I can tap. And a lot of what I do is, hey, what are you doing? This is what we're hearing. This is what we need. Let's work together. Let's dream big. Let's do something fun. It's how I approach it. And folks can visit www.newhavenpridecenter.org to access all our virtual programming. And you can call 203-951-9662. That's 203-951-9662 between the hours of 12 and 5 for our case management and warm line. So that means that if you need help with anything, give us a call. And if you need help just talking to someone, we're there as well. And you can text too.
Well, Patrick Dunn is the executive director of the New Haven Pride Center. Juan Carlos Soto is the director of case management and support services. And Max Cisneros is the Latinx program officer. Thank you all so much for coming on the show, for talking about the work that you all are continuing to do as you adapt to this crisis along with everyone else in New Haven, and stay safe and healthy. And I look forward to seeing more what the Pride Center does in the days and weeks to come.
Thanks for having us, Tom.
Thank you so much for having us.
You can find a recording of this conversation at the New Haven Independent's Facebook page. And also there'll be an article about our conversation on the New Haven Independent sometime soon. And check out newhavenindependent.org for stories about every way that COVID-19 pandemic is affecting our community. Thanks so much, and stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.